I'll call this meeting to order, and I'll ask my colleagues on the Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee, or JFAC, if they have any changes to the agenda today.
I have no changes.
All right, hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, having a motion and a second, all in favor of adopting today's agenda as is, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Great. So next we're going to discuss what we did last week. We wanted to go back and determine all of kind of what the conversation led us to. And let me go ahead and share my screen so that we have those up. And the purpose of this, are you going to share it or should I? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mosier. The purpose of this is to make sure that as this body, which exists to collect fiscal policy recommendations to pass along to the broader county council, we want to make sure that everything that we're hearing from you, not only in the room, but also online, we're recording that correctly. So we'll wait for this to go ahead and share. So in the meeting, our last meeting, chaired by Councilmember Wiltz, we heard that we should be funding existing community teams doing reentry work in lieu of creating a Monroe County government team. We outlined a couple of different funding options to create a Justice Non-Reverting Fund, Sophia Travis and some others. Of course, these are not mutually exclusive, nor are they exhaustive. So if other options come online, we can discuss those. We also heard from you all that we wanted to implement the Integrated Reentry and Correctional Support Program in Monroe County. Commissioner Githens, who is here at the table today, has been leading that effort to liaise with Indiana FSSA on that program. And so that was one of the recommendations we heard. The third recommendation that we heard was to look at the Eve Hill recommendations, whether that's reentry planning, case management, and programming, whether that's funding a case management position in the jail, whether that's funding supports for families and peer supports, or funding for housing. Can you scroll down, Ms. Mosier? Thank you. Or funding supporting employment. All of those we feel can either be implemented on their own, or at the very first bullet point, where we're working with community teams that are already doing that work. So that's kind of what we heard. We also heard that we should fund the creation and operational support for a forensic assertive community treatment team. Again, this is part of the Eve Hill recommendations, and you can see more information about what FACT is there, as well as a link to the SAMHSA site, which gives that description. That's really the source code. We also heard that we needed to reduce silos and duplication of services when it comes to reentry. So we heard that the health department and Purdue University Extension are working together on a service mapping project. And we also heard that when we visited a jail over in Ohio, that the commissioners there created a commissioner-level Office of Justice Policy and Programs. And they were in charge of initiatives particularly involving grants, which is something that I think we are desirous of in terms of a funding mechanism. And I think, Ms. Mosier, if you could scroll down, I think that might be up. And then we also heard that in terms of how we should be approaching our funding, in terms of maybe a philosophy, that there could be a one-to-one match for incarceration reducing recidivism to funding for incarceration. That was a recommendation from Mayor Hamilton, who joins us via Zoom today. And then we also heard that we need to continue funding and strengthen, and where needed, for our reentry court here in Monroe County. So let me take a pause and turn it back to the JFAC folks. Did we forget anything on these list of recommendations?
I just want to applaud your note-taking abilities because it's hard to do that when you're chairing the meeting, and this is lovely. Thank you.
Councilmember Crossley, did we forget any item here as it pertained to last time's discussion on reentry?
No. It was a good recap. Thank you.
All right, I want to turn it to the non-voting members gathered here at the table. Are there any fiscal recommendations that we can pass along to the council that are not included here? Also, if those online would like to chime in, now would be a good time as well. Pretty exhaustive?
I did have one suggestion. As you're trying to work through kind of priorities and funding, it might be, I would just invite you, and I know the Public Defender's Office as well, to spend maybe a day in court to be able to see how those processes work, which I think might be able to help see where the most immediate gaps are that could be addressed, especially when we're talking about a lot of these programs, like the IRACs. I'm not sure how that interacts with the current system, and to better understand that, as well as many of the other funding that you've talked about. So I just want to extend that invitation to all the members of the County Council, as well as on the JFAC and the commissioners, to spend some time in court with us and just let us know if there are dates, and we're happy to send those out.
I see Mayor Hamilton has their hand raised.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the detailed report on this. I guess a couple points, three. One, I did urge at least a one-to-one match, maybe more. I just want to make clear that that was kind of a minimum from my perspective and my own recommendation on that. And thank you for capturing that if you could. And then I guess I also wanted to note, you know, we heard so much from New Leaf, New Life, and kind of their actual budget situation and needs and all. And I didn't know if it was, I may have missed, but capturing kind of some of the details they said about what they do and what they could do with more. And then the last point I would just make is, and I can make this later too, about fiscal situation, is these feel like a litany of good suggestions and not non-ordered, as they say. And I don't remember all of them from the meeting, but I trust that they were there. I just, you know, the key is kind of figuring out prioritizing and how much they cost and the outcomes that are expected. These are all kind of inputs that can help achieve things, but I like to see it driven by what's the outcome we're trying to accomplish, maybe, and what's the most efficient way. Anyway, thanks so much for sharing. Just add those three comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Hamilton, for your comments. I would also ask Ms. Moser, could you scroll down just a little bit? Keep going, keep going. There we go. So we also are going to start identifying potential funding sources as it pertains to some of these items. In addition to the outcome-based approach that Mayor Hamilton just announced or recommended, we also know that there's been some questions about how we are going to pay for all of these, and that's a very appropriate public concern. And so, again, we've outlined 5 different potential funding approaches. This, again, is not exhaustive, nor is it ordered. So we will, again, the purpose of this body is to come up with these ideas as an advice to the Monroe County Council, and the Monroe County Council will then make decisions based upon what they would like to do. Any questions or comments at this point?
Yes, please. Thank you. Perhaps adding to the potential funding sources, the opioid settlement distribution. I know that we've got lots of ideas, but I feel like it fits and deserves a mention in the list. And these are specific just to Intercept 4, correct?
They are, and the thinking was that these could be used specifically to fund some of these projects.
Yep, okay. Okay, thanks.
I was just gonna say real quick, I know I said it last week, and I'll continue to keep hitting at it as well. Again, this isn't just a Monroe County issue or a City of Bloomington issue. This is everybody collectively. So when I see the whole one-on-one match, of course, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I also would like to see how we can get some type of partnership going with funding from both city and county alike. I know PS Lit was given to us in the county, and we have a general idea. Some of us on the county side have a general idea of what we might use those funds for, but a lot of that could possibly go to a new build. So when we think of, funding such as opioid or, setting aside some money for ARPA, it would be really nice to see how we can work collaboratively together with city and county and match funds together. I just don't want us to get in this mindset of just, the county has this and we have PS Lit and all of those things when we have, colleagues alike that could help with this and assist as well. So that's just one of the things that I just wanted to point out.
Great, thank you. So PS Lit stands for Public Safety Local Income Tax. It's a revenue stream, or a taxing stream that we have here in the county. Thank you for reminding us not to use. All right. So the last thing I'm going to point out on this document that you see on your screen is this recap will happen for every single meeting, where we'll go back through the last meeting and make sure that we're hearing from you all as you're making recommendations to us, that we are hearing you. We want this to be a time where we can show you that this isn't 3 elected officials sitting in front of a table doing whatever we feel is appropriate. We want your recommendations. We want to be implementing the items that you're bringing to our attention, because quite frankly, we depend on them. So if at any point you do have additional questions or additions, please feel free to contact the council office. Ms. Mosier has been doing a fantastic job of updating this JFAC website, so you can find all these documents that we just discussed and we're about to discuss on the JFAC website, which you can find under the County Council in Monroe County. Any further questions or comments about what we discussed last time? All right, let's launch then into our focus for this week. And this week, we're going to be talking about Intercept 5, which is community corrections. And I'm going to steal a page out of Kate Wiltz's playbook, and I'm going to share a PowerPoint that I created to kind of launch us into this. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see and hear? All right, excellent. So today we're going to be talking about community corrections and probation in Monroe County. And here's what it looks like on SAMHSA's SIM Intercept model. Today we're going to be talking about what happens when an individual goes into jail or a specialty court and then comes out of that jail or dispositional court into our probation system. In this model, it shows a linear progression from jail and dispositional court through reentry down to probation and into community. And as we know, there are recidivism issues. So we're gonna be talking about that. But I think this is an important point to pause and say, the way that we've organized these meetings is to focus on these different intercept steps. And today we're at the very last one. Justice in Monroe County is organized into 3 buckets. And everything that I'm saying today can be found and is taken directly from the Monroe County's webpage, which is found at the bottom of every slide. For those of you in the room here, you can't see it because of the closed captioning, but that's co.monroe.in.us/justice. So if you have any questions about today's presentation, that's a great place to go to dive deeper. So underneath the circuit court, we had our board of judges, we have probation and community corrections, and the clerk of court. For the purposes of today's discussion, a lot of what our probation and community corrections teams do are closely interlinked with decisions that both criminal and civil judges make. And you'll see that in the data that we'll show in just a little bit. But if you take the time to go to co.monroe.in.us/justice and you follow any of the links for emails, if you ask questions of an individual, a lot of times it might get referred to a judge or someone in the board of judges, or vice versa, back down to probation or community corrections. I just wanted to make that clarification that the judges and probation and community corrections are very tightly linked. Legal, we have our prosecutor and public defenders, and they, of course, liaise very closely with the circuit court. And then we have the sheriff, his deputies in jail. And it's worth pointing out that there's a number of these positions that you elect come election time. So we're going to stay with probation and community corrections. The mission of the Monroe County Circuit Court Probation Department is to promote a safer community by intervening in the lives of offenders, holding them accountable, and serving as a catalyst for positive change. And the way they do that is by dividing up the department into 7 divisions. In the first division, we have our pretrial services program, and this is really influential in terms of making sure that we are making prompt and equitable decisions for all defendants, regardless of their ability to pay fees or monetary bonds, We have our juvenile division, which addresses issues with those under the age of 18. And our adult division, which addresses issues for those over the age of 18. And you can see here that it serves about 2,000 Monroe County residents a year, or adult offenders a year. Our problem-solving courts are absolutely phenomenal. This is one of the things that makes our community really amazing and has been for decades. I encourage you to go to co.monroe.in.us/justice and find out more about these problem-solving courts. These are really looking at those criminogenic risk factors and trying through supervision and treatment to solve some of these recidivism issues. We have community corrections, which the distinction here is that community corrections deals with home detention, day reporting, and work release. We also have our court alcohol and drug program, which deals with individuals who are convicted of alcohol and drug-related offenses. And finally, we have one of the jewels in the Monroe County hat, JDAI, or Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiatives. This is a program by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and it allows us to make sure that as juveniles come into the system, that we are doing everything we can to provide alternatives to detention for each and every one of those youth. Here's the data. All of this data is taken from the 2022 executive summary for the probation department. And that executive summary, Ms. Mosier, is that on the JFAC website or in the agenda, or where is it?
It is on the JFAC website under today's meeting link.
Great. So these data can be found on one of the pages of that document, which you can find on the JFAC website through the Monroe County Council website. I won't go through and read all of this here, but you'll see, as I discussed before, probation serves about 2,000 individuals a year, and those are represented by 2,700 cases. So you'll see that there are some people with multiple caseloads. That is criminal and juvenile cases. On the civil side, there's 19 referred for investigation or drug testing. This department is really good about bringing in grant funds, which really helps leverage some of these great programs that they offer, almost $2 million every single year. So that's really exciting from a county council perspective. There's the amount of restitution collected on behalf of victims, the user fees that are collected, and if you want more information about those user fees, where those are coming from, the breakdown of that amount, I encourage you to look at pages 14 through 16 of the probation's 2022 executive summary. Those pages have very detailed breakdowns, and if you have questions about any of that or any of this data, you can either ask us and we'll refer you off to the right people, or you can go to the website at the bottom here, which is co.monroe.in.us/justice. Here's our positivity rate for drug testing, as well as our community service hours, which returns about $19,000 worth of economic activity back into our economy. The probation department invests heavily in evidence-based practices. This is a model by which a lot of other departments here in Monroe County are looking, but we know specifically from a justice standpoint that probation, parole, and community corrections programs that are evidence-based are much more likely to be successful in reducing recidivism. Not only are we performative about these evidence-based practices, but we also take part in an auditing process that makes sure that we are doing the evidence-based practices appropriately. And that last paragraph there details some of the steps that these audited evidence-based practices can be done in a justice perspective. Again, I didn't want to overload the audience with data or with a lot of words. You can find much more information on all of this at the website below that I've been repeating. And the second to last slide here is about the Reducing Revocations Challenge. In the reading list for last time and this time, we've included multiple scholarly articles on the Reducing Revocations Challenge. It is hard to overstate how significant this program is for Monroe County and how unique we are to have a program like this. In phase 2 of this Reducing Revocations Challenge, we are one of only 5 sites throughout the entire United States that's taking this evidence-based approach, partnering with scholars at Indiana University and looking at ways that we can reduce the revocations or the way that folks are cycling through our system. It's really exciting that this program, that we were selected to continue in this program. And what's even more exciting is that Arnold Ventures, which is a national foundation, is providing $170,000 toward this area. So our hope is to get Professor Miriam Northcutt-Brummert here to discuss her research, which is the Reducing Revocations Challenges. So I'm not going to spoil that project, but just know that we are really, in some areas, including this area, at the forefront of the national conversation on reducing recidivism. And lastly, I'm just going to be a broken record. Dive deeper. Head over to co.monroe.in.us/justice. There's so much more there. I know we're going to have a broader conversation about some of this information and these data, but I would also encourage you to head over there and look at that. Also go onto the JFAC website and take a look at the 2022 Probation Department's report. I do apologize that no one from the Probation Department is going to be here today. No one from the Board of Judges will be here today, but we are going to be talking about something that's very important to this intercept, and that is housing. But before I introduce our speaker today, I wanted to pause and ask if there's any thoughts, questions, or comments on the slides that were just presented.
I've got a question. I'm not sure if you can answer it or not. in the data, it showed that 719,000 plus in user fees were collected. How are those used? What happens to those after they're collected?
So I would refer you back to those pages 14 through 16. It doesn't go into one pot that's used for one, item, and we can just certainly talk about that, after that. Or another option is that we can bring in individuals who can talk at length about how that program exists today and how it's evolved over time. So I think that would be an interesting option. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Monroe County doesn't have a work release program, but some people are on work release in other counties and monitored through Monroe County. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. I did my very best to copy and paste data strictly from reports or websites, so I wasn't making up data as we went along, so I appreciate that clarification. Any other comments or questions about this data, including from anybody back in the audience, the public as well? All right, hearing none, I think then we will transition to our next item. And we have with us Mary Morgan, who is Executive Director of Heading Home, an initiative that is supported by Monroe County and other units. So tell us what we need to know about what's going on with housing and all that here in Monroe County.
All right, well, thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I feel like I'm jumping in a little bit midstream, and so I hope I'm not redundant with some of your other speakers. I will say that I'm really glad to see representatives from New Leaf, New Life, because they are an institution that does such great work, and I have tremendous respect for the work that you do, and I'm glad that you're at the table. I'm also glad that Heading Home is well represented here. We have 3 members of my 9-member advisory council in the room at this meeting, including Penny Gibbons, Beverly Callender Anderson, and John Hamilton. As you mentioned, Councilmember Iverson, we are a community collaborative that is about a year and a half old at this point. We were created in collaboration with the Community Foundation of Bloomington and Monroe County, the United Way of Monroe County government, City of Bloomington government, Bloomington Township, Perry Township, and several other groups. There was a working group that met for over a year in the 2020-2021 timeframe. I think many of you were on that group that helped update the Heading Home strategic plan. And that plan is a list of objectives and goals designed to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-repeating. I think we fit into many of the different intercept points, although we are not modeled after the intercept model. And I would encourage people to go to our website at headinghomeindiana.org to see a copy of that strategic plan and some of the other work that we're doing. Knowing that I was going to come here, I consulted with some of the direct service providers that we work with in partnership. Heading Home is not a direct service provider. We were created kind of to be a backbone organization for this region. So the region is not just Monroe County, although many of the services, probably most of the services, are concentrated here. The region includes Monroe, Morgan, Owen, Lawrence, Greene, and Martin counties, because we feel strongly that all of these issues related to housing and homelessness are not just for our own community, but there's a regional aspect to it that we believe needs to be addressed, which makes things a little more challenging, but is super important. So we were created to address some systemic needs and to identify gaps in services, to bring groups, organizations, and individuals together in a collaborative problem-solving approach. And so we've spent a lot of time in the past year and a half building those relationships and trying to identify the gaps. The 2 overarching needs that we see are housing, obviously, in this market for really any income level, but more acutely for low-income residents. And particularly, and I'm sure you have discussed this before, people who are formerly incarcerated have additional barriers to getting housing. It's increasingly common for apartment complexes and property managers to do background checks and won't even consider many times applicants that have any kind of felony or any criminal history on their record. So right out of the gate, even though our society is built on the premise of you've served your time, you've paid your debt to society, and now you're back and integrated into society, we all know that that's just not the case. And so, and again, I defer to New Leaf, New Life. You've seen this up close in trying to find housing for the people that you work with. And so I think that's going to require a lot of work with landlords, incentivizing landlords, building relationships. One of Heading Home's projects that we're embarking on is to do that. We've provided support to expand the Bloomington Housing Authority's Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund. It's a program that basically provides a kind of insurance policy for landlords who agree to accept residents that have vouchers and maybe have a background that wouldn't normally be accepted in their apartments. We have funded this so that it doesn't just, is not a program just for the city of Bloomington, but can be applied to residents outside of the city limits within Monroe County. So we think that's one recent program, but we think it has a lot of potential for opening doors. It has a tenant education component as well, so it's a great program that we're happy to support. So there are some things to do with the housing piece, but honestly, I think that the other real need is for people, and people who are walking beside those who have been previously incarcerated. I have not talked to any organization that has case managers or outreach workers or other staff that feels like they have the capacity to do what they really need to do. And that includes probation, by the way. The caseloads that most of the people who are on the front lines have is daunting. I assume you've talked to some of these folks or you've heard about this, but it's really hard to provide the navigation and support that's needed when you have 40 people on your list or whatever the number may be, and each with a unique individual problem. So I think that that's something that we need to grapple with as a region. I think that there are some ways that we can be creative about that, but in terms of like trying to enlist volunteer support, and I've talked with some of you about increasing the number of support networks that are volunteers for some folks who maybe don't have their own individual support networks. I mean, we all do if we're privileged enough to have people that we can call on, but not everybody does. And that's such an important thing. If you hit a problem, to know that you have somebody you can call who has the time to spend and problem solve with you. So I guess those are very broadly the kinds of things that we see in talking with the agencies that we work with, specifically about community corrections and the criminal justice system. There were a couple of things that stood out. One, there is a court-mandated rehab program, I believe is my understanding, but there is no equivalent, and again, if anyone here is more informed on this, please let me know. There's no equivalent for a court-mandated psychiatric care program. And with mental health issues that I'm sure has come up in discussions that you've had, this is seen as something that's really necessary and a program that other communities have engaged in, and I don't believe that we have that as an option. So we'd really like to see something like that where someone can go in and get stabilized instead of being diverted to jail, and come out on the other end stable, able to get on with their life, and transition back into community. That's one thing. There's also a gap in services between the time when somebody is released and then maybe they're recommended for treatment. That is a huge issue, and that warm handoff that I believe the consultant's report talks about is so important. If you are released, and I think this is also in discussions I've had with probation officers, this is a frustration that they have where somebody is released and told, well, you need to get an appointment at Centerstone or wherever. And the follow-up with that, the communication between the probation officers who are trying to make that happen and the individual and the agency, it's challenging because there's often a big time gap, sometimes measured in months, before an appointment can be achieved. So these are things that I think are systemic and things that we can address, but they're very complicated too because we have different agencies with different processes and procedures, different programs. You know, it's cliche to talk about silos. We are doing a better job, I think, of talking and trying to break those silos down, but there's still a lot of work to do in that regard. The other thing I would just say, you talked about funding options, and one of the things that is so challenging is to have a sustainable, reliable revenue stream. So agencies tell me this all the time, where you might be funded by a particular grant for a year, and you stand up a program, but you have no guarantee that that program will be sustained in the future. A lot of funders look towards innovation and want to fund new things, or they don't want to fund operations. Operations are people, right? Operations are the people that do the work. And so I think that's a challenge in addressing any of these problems. We can put one-time funding sources towards them, but then what do you do over time? And this is particularly true for frontline caseworkers who are often underpaid, and the turnover is often very high. And so then that adds another barrier of just the ability to have, as a person who has been recently released, if you're and just generally anyone who's experiencing homelessness, if you're working with a case manager and you build that relationship, and that relationship is one of trust, which is so important, and then that person leaves, and then you have to start all over, and you might fall through the cracks. So again, that goes back to funding, it goes back to sustainable funding, and it goes back to the need for people to do this work. So I'm going to stop there. I am happy to answer any questions. I will say that, you know, we are not focused primarily at this point on people who've been incarcerated, although obviously that is affects the population that we're working towards. So it is it's something that we're obviously very aware of.
Thank you so very much. Always good to hear from you. It's always good to hear from your perspective, particularly as you're liaising amongst all these different agencies with that singular focus of making sure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-repeating. So thank you for being here today. Are there any questions from my JFAC colleagues?
I have a question. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund and your involvement. So people in need of housing would be issued vouchers. And can you tell me how that process works?
So they're two separate things. BHA, the South Central Community Action Program, and other agencies have vouchers for the subsidized housing for people with low income. And so there is a process, there's a coordinated entry process that is used to identify people who are perhaps more vulnerable, and then those people get priority for vouchers. The BHA has its own separate system. There is a wait list. There is also difficulty in once you secure a housing voucher that allows you to get subsidized housing. I serve on the board of the Housing Authority. The last report we got is that 40% of people with vouchers are unable to find housing because they are unable to find landlords who will accept those vouchers.
Right.
So the risk mitigation program is really designed to be an incentive for landlords to open up more units to people who have vouchers already. And so the idea is that, as you know, low-income residents, people experiencing homelessness, there's a lot of stigma attached to that. Within the landlord community, there are landlords who are very supportive, and we need to celebrate them. But there are also landlords who might be reluctant to open their units to people who have vouchers because they've heard maybe third hand of a horror story of somebody, somebody that they knew who knew somebody else who knew somebody else. It's that kind of apocryphal tale of an apartment getting destroyed or problems with tenants. And so they don't want the hassle. And part of it is that they might not be informed and they might be relying on this kind of third-hand knowledge. But this is designed as a way to provide some reassurance so that if, for example, you have property damage to your apartment that is beyond the security deposit, you could go to this fund and say, all right, here's the costs that I'm going to incur for renovating this apartment after the tenant leaves, and that fund would help offset that cost.
So there's no impact on the voucher system that we with this program. So are there other ways to, I think this is a great program, and obviously it's filling what sounds like a key gap in the theory there of getting folks into housing. So just from a perspective of formerly incarcerated folks, is there a problem getting those vouchers for those folks? And I don't know that you would know the answer. This is where my head is going.
I don't know the answer, but I could find out. I know that BHA, for the units that it operates, right? So there's the housing units so they're a landlord too. And then they also administer the voucher program for the general market. I believe they have relaxed some of they're not as stringent in terms of their background checks. And I don't know if you have any perspective on that.
I do, actually.
Real close.
I've seen this play out, and actually, it was somebody that was near and dear to me, who had picked up a felony charge from a while back, changed his life, has some children, and actually applied for a housing voucher. He has been incarcerated, and he was denied, but the appeal process, I was like, you know what? Appeal it, because you have a lot to say. You've changed your life. Give it a try, appeal it. Unfortunately, most people would probably see that and then that's it for them, right? They feel defeated and whatever. But this person had enough, gusto to go for it and say, you know what? I have changed my life and I'm going to go to this meeting with these people and tell them. And he actually walked out of there with a voucher. So I do know that they do hear out appeals, and especially for if there's children involved or people who are more vulnerable to be at risk of homelessness. There's a lot of factors that play into it. The problem that I've seen more than even receiving there. There is an appeals process if you're denied, which I have seen folks be successful. What I haven't seen is an increase of landlords who wants to rent to, number one, a felon, and then number two, somebody with a BHA, a housing voucher. So once this person obtained his housing voucher, then the struggle was really on to try to find somebody. Not only will rent to you with this, but now I have this voucher. He actually was down to his last extension, maybe a week out, and we have a huge housing list at New Leaf, New Life, and he just called some private landlord off there and was like, look, I am in a desperate situation. And this landlord, give him a shot, and he's been there a long time. And I've actually, because he is close to me, I've been to his house, and super clean, super proud of it, flowers outside. I mean, it is difficult. It's very difficult to find the strength to go and explain yourself to people who you feel like don't understand you because they just sent you a letter saying, ain't no way we're giving you, So to find the strength to go in there and then be empowered by the end results of the meeting, that was so heartwarming to me to say, what you do have a story to tell, and sometimes it does matter to people.
I am really glad to hear that story. I wish we had more stories like that to tell. And I feel like we have a lot of work to do in supporting landlords and finding them, because when we have more apartment complexes being being purchased by out-of-state owners, I think we're going to have to turn more and more to the locally owned, maybe smaller landlords who we can build that relationship with and then provide ways to support them and hear them. One of the things that we're hoping to do is to create a roundtable of landlords that can meet regularly and then just discuss some of the issues that they confront and figure out, well, how can we address that? Even as simple as having somebody or some hotline to call if there's an issue, rather than turn to eviction immediately. So I think that's a really powerful story, and thanks for sharing that.
Are there any other questions from JFAC?
I was gonna ask, thank you for that. I previously used to work in property management, so this is a conversation that is hitting home. I want to stay on the landlord incentivizing component of it. And I guess my question was, are you currently talking to landlords? Like, what would be your pitch if we had landlords that were watching and they understand that there's a basic need for folks that are previously incarcerated on top of other things that our community needs? Like, what would be the pitch that Head at Home folks would give to people to make them want to do it? I know why I think they should, but what would be your pitch to get to somebody to say, okay, I can do this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we would definitely partner with agencies like New Leaf, New Life, and others that are working directly with clients, because those are the compelling stories. We created a video of landlords who are currently accepting tenants with vouchers to tell their stories about why they're doing it. They say things like it's the right thing to do. They have family members who have been in that situation, so they can see very concretely how transformative it is to go from an unstable housing situation or a situation where you don't have a place to stay to a stable house, and then all of the other things can fall into place in an easier way. It's community building, and I think that it's not a particularly hard pitch to make. I think it's just it's a lot of one-on-one work, and also sharing stories. We also made a video of talking with tenants who have described how their life has changed and their families' lives have changed once they got stable housing, much in the way that you've described. We're also, we've had some conversations with the Glick Foundation. The Glick company owns several apartment complexes here and in Indy and elsewhere, and they have they're a very supportive landlord, and they even have a property, it's not a property manager, but they have a staff person on site for some of their low-income housing projects that is designed to be a liaison and to identify early on if there are issues with a tenant. Maybe they've been paying their rent on time and then suddenly they're late. So going and talking to them and saying, hey, you know, are you okay? Is there anything we can do? Are there resources we can provide? Because oftentimes because it's embarrassing, right? I mean, we've all been in situations where things are not going right, and you're like, oh, I'm kind of embarrassed that this is, you know, something that's happened to me. So oftentimes that turns into a crisis when, if you catch it early enough, you know, you can go to a township and get some resources to help with your, you know, you can go to, so I think that we'd like to bring in and folks from GLIC and other landlords who are supportive, and really have that peer-to-peer recruitment, because I think that's powerful too, where it's not me or an agency telling a landlord, hey, you should do this, but it's another landlord saying, this is my experience, this is what I found to be helpful, and kind of bringing along more landlords that way.
I was just going to add to that too. GLIC is a very well-known, respected company with housing, and that's based in Indianapolis. And it would be maybe I love the idea of partnering with GLIC, because maybe some people are just on the fence, and if you see somebody that has that name recognition that is doing the work, and I've known people and currently know people that are on vouchers that stay in GLIC properties, that would help tremendously. I think sometimes we hear with voucher programs and tenants with the bad and the ugly aspects of it. But if we can spread the goodness of, hey, you know, this is how we are helping people. I've known people that have been on vouchers that have gone on to get themselves out of that and have gone on to own homes. Wouldn't it be great to have something that we could do to show and help and build where more folks would be willing to take vouchers? So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, before I kick it out to you all, I just wanted to point out a bit of, I don't know, happenstance in our community, that a meeting that's starting in 4 minutes is going to consider constructing 6,000 houses as we're sitting here talking about housing. So it's a really interesting time to be in this community. It's really interesting time to be talking about some of these issues. And I'm certainly been taking a lot of notes. So thank you. I think at the risk of me talking anymore, what other questions do we have for heading home? What other questions are there for the presentation, or questions in general about the way that probation, or those exiting the jail into probation or exiting back into the community from probation are coming into housing?
Hey, Peter, this is Linda Grove-Paul from Centerstone.
Oh, go ahead, Linda. Yeah.
You know, related to the question that Councilman Crossley asked, you know, I think that supportive housing is a best practice model. We know that that is a model that works. And I think, you know, having hundreds of individuals in the community that are successfully housed with mental health and addictions issues, that do have landlords that, you know, believe in it, it really is because of the relationship. And I think as Mary was talking about, you know, just seeing that if you have somebody who can support you, they understand, hey, you know, this person, if they're not responding, just give us a call. If there is a concern, they're behind in their rent. You know, when they understand that and they're able to work with a provider or, you know, any kind of group of providers. So I think, you know, just having that sort of that consortium where you do have some standardized expectations for, you know, providers, and working with, you know, somebody like a GLIC makes huge sense, because I think the more we can have, you know, real quality in terms of what our expectations for our folks are, then, you know, I think people feel reassured. And there's so many wonderful success stories, just like, you know, what you find in, you know, people who hire individuals that are, working with the problem solving court or, other folks that, they're like, oh, these are the best workers I have because, they have support that's helping them. So I think it is really important to, recognize there are some best practice models that really make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. That was Linda Grove Paul with Centerstone. Any other comments or questions, thoughts? Please.
I have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So for some under housing and some are mental health, for the housing, can someone who's currently incarcerated apply for a voucher?
I don't know. I'll ask. So they haven't been released yet, you're saying? Yeah.
Right.
Do you happen to know?
They cannot.
Okay.
And then,
And is that a policy?
I'm not sure, but I know that it has came up before and I've had to call because, the process is an online process for applying for a voucher. And it requires like a lot of personal information. I'm not sure the ins and outs on it, but I have called and they said that someone who was incarcerated could not apply.
I think that might be because it requires a proof of income. And so that would be a challenge, but I can try to find more information about that.
okay. And then if someone has a housing voucher and they were to be reincarcerated, even for a short period of time, is there a process or point person where probation or their attorney can reach out to let them know where they are to see if those vouchers are going to stay in effect? I'm just thinking about someone who has a voucher and they might get reincarcerated for, say, anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks, and making sure they can be really have that housing when they get out.
Right. Well, it would depend on whether they were able to continue to meet their portion of the rent payment. And so I do know, and again, I'm looking over here because you might have more direct experience with this. I do know that there are staff on hand so that if there are issues that come up, they could be called on to sort of walk the resident through what should happen. At BHA, at least, I know that's true, but I don't know specifically for that situation. And again, I can talk to staff and find out what the process is and get back to you.
Thank you. And even a point person that would be a good phone number to reach out to would be really helpful.
Great.
And if you don't mind, I have one more question.
Please, yeah.
You mentioned that you were hoping that there'd be a court-ordered psychiatric care program, and I hear that in a couple different ways. I was wondering, when you say that, what do you envision? What would you hope that would look like?
So again, I am not an expert in this field, but I do hear from the folks that there needs to be an alternative to incarceration for people who are experiencing mental health issues, and that I guess the best practices would be that it would not be receiving treatment in jail, but it would be receiving treatment at a facility to address their issues rather than being incarcerated. So if it is, I'd be happy to explore that a little bit further. Again, this was just I was trying to tap the brain power of the people that I know are in direct services and understand these issues better than I do, but I'd be happy to follow up with you on that.
Thank you, and I appreciate you sharing all the information you had as well.
Of course, thank you.
Well, and I'm happy just to include as far as, looking at an alternative, because I think, Mary, kind of what you were referencing is with substance residential treatment, there is a 28-day option. But if you're a person who has a psychiatric emergency, oftentimes, you might be able to be hospitalized at IU Health, or you might be able to go to Meadows or something, but it's typically just for a matter of days. And there's really not an equivalent for mental health, a longer term mental health treatment. And part of that is there's not a payment point for it. That is definitely something that, we're talking about. And then there's some short-term crisis funds and resources, but in terms of looking at something that is an equivalent longer term, they're really, that is a hole, and there's a big hole in funding as far as that's concerned as well. So just wanted to mention that.
Well, that's a good point. You know, we've also heard from Sheriff Marte that there's a good number of folks that are in the Monroe County Jail at any given time that are suffering with mental or behavioral health issues. So we know that this is definitely an issue, and it's so much so that one of our future sessions is going to be devoted entirely to treatment. We're just going to spend the entire time just talking about treatment options, and I really appreciate your perspective on it and your insightful questions. Any other questions or comments on this topic?
I do have one. First off, thank you for everything that you do. And I just like housing is so important for reentry. It is so important, like that we're currently New Leaf New Life is tracking recidivism rates for 704 mentees. That we have 167 have experienced reincarceration, making our overall recidivism rates 23.7. But folks who we've helped with housing, that is like transitional housing, deposits for apartments. But, you know, I think oftentimes we forget like that folks can apply to go to treatment, but there is a move-in fee generally, right? Places like Sober Living, Oxford House, Courage to Change Sober Living, they operate and pay. These are rented spaces, and then they function by the clients paying rent. So on the 75 people that we've helped with housing, whether that be transitional or whatever, our recidivism rate for that program is 9.3%. So I know that it wasn't until I personally was housed at Amethyst that I even could wrap my mind around the thought that I could be safe enough to get better somewhere. You know, when you can't maintain a water source, it's very hard to maintain a mental health appointment, right? Or maintain something like that. But yeah, housing is super important for us, so that we can re-enter, so that we can re-enter at all. Where are we going to re-enter to? Like our campsites, our super unsafe, dangerous environments, or goodness forbid that we be housed in jail because we have nowhere to go. And sometimes that happens, right? I think personally for me, it's happened more than one time where it would be winter time and the judge at the time was just like, you know what, it's cold outside and you have nowhere to go. A lot of times folks aren't released when they could be released to house arrest because they have nowhere to go, right? And I don't know, like this is a huge barrier for people to re-enter successfully. But yeah, just our recidivism rate should show you like how important it is for people to be able to re-enter, that they have a shower, a safe place to sleep, and that you know, an alarm clock, electricity, you know, the basic things that somewhere for probation to stop by and see you, because that's, you know, a requirement too, you know. You must have an address.
And think about, you know, the added barriers that if you have electronic monitoring or there's drug or other substance testing, how important housing would be for you.
Right. Daily reporting where you have to show up every day and you have to set your alarm clock with electricity you don't have, with the phone you don't have, in a house you don't have, and make it to an appointment that you can't get to, right? It's just, it's a broken system for sure.
And I would add that if you have a sex offense,
yeah.
it's not even, forget about it. That's an even greater barrier. So.
Is it on? Okay, gotta get it rid of this. I was wondering if your landlord risk mitigation was useful for things that were not the housing choice vouchers, but also like the rapid rehousing and programs like Beacon, also like New Leaf New Life, and also if that was helpful for any payees that were maybe helping to ensure that payment was getting to a landlord.
Not at this time, but it is a very new program, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity to see how it goes and then expand it to some of these other areas of need. All the things you mentioned also have, you know, needs. And so I think that this is one of the things that we're going to expand over time, see how it goes.
I'm hearing a lot of solutions. I'm hearing a lot of ideas being floated around. I think I've heard that the need is being articulated, and it's really encouraging to hear some of the solutions being bandied around. Clearly, there's no silver bullet here, unfortunately, and so we'll work on it here in county government. Are there any other questions from our JFAC members here? I'm getting tired. My Iowan's starting to come out.
I guess I'd just like to wrap up by saying thank you to you on county council and county commissioners for your support of Heading Home and the work just more broadly in the community. It's not always popular work, and really appreciate your support and commitment to solving problems.
Thank you for being here, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. All right, so now let's transition to just general questions or discussions about probation and ways that we can think about making, there are gaps in what we're doing and within the context of probation. As you're interacting with folks, whether the city, the health department, prosecutor's office, the commissioners, or out in the community, what can we be doing better? What can be improved upon? Where are there gaps in what we're at?
Maybe it was already answered in your report, but is there a number of people that are still on probation due to like non-payment or inability to pay for services?
That's a fantastic question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head in the data that I presented, but that's something that we could look up, and that's something that we can get an answer to you.
Also, for people who have been arrested and pay some of the fees to be out, if they're then adjudged not guilty, are they still having to pay the fees for the ankle bracelets and other things? That seems like we're punishing people that are later determined not to be guilty. And that I know that has been bringing in fees, but is that the way that our community, does that reflect our community values?
Sure. It sounds like a more robust conversation in the future about the fees and the fee structures and where they are coming from and what they're funding is certainly going to be in our future here. Yeah.
I have, concerns, especially I do know I work with lots of folks who are in problem-solving court, and sometimes I feel like at the end they've done really well, they've changed their life, and really the holdup for them graduating these programs are the fees. I have multiple friends, like I'm in recovery, so I work with a lot of, I'm friends with people in recovery, and I have several friends who, like, their major concern is, how could I attend all these meetings? These are required IOPs, these are required therapy sessions, MRT, and every other thing, work a full-time job, pay for housing in Bloomington, Indiana, and pay off these fees. And I think for problem-solving court, it's around $150 average per month. I have the handbook, but yeah. So the finances and fees for reentry court, I pulled this off of the problem-solving court or the website. So it's $25 a month problem-solving court user fees, $150 public defender fee may be added. Treatment costs are responsibility of the participant. Drug testing fees must be paid by participants. The costs range from $10 to $25 per drug test. Some folks are drug screened every day. So average user fees plus drug testing approximately $150 per month during phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phases, the end phases, the averages are about $50 a month. So it does lessen as they progress. But if the drug tests, I don't know that everyone's screened every day. I'm sure that there's a gap there, but they do daily reporting every day. And I personally haven't been in problem-solving court, so I'm not sure how often they're screened. That's a lot of money. You know, I don't know. I do see, you know, folks' major concern with especially the problem-solving courts is all the requirements and then the fees.
Please.
I seem to recall hearing from our probation department that a lot of fees are being waived. And I would like, I'm just putting that out there as something I want to talk to them about and make sure that I'm understanding that correctly, because that was my impression, that they had been not collecting the fees, all the fees that were due. But the repercussions of that and how that plays out for folks, I think I agree. We really need to have a better understanding of that.
I agree.
Because that does not sound fair.
And I will mention that one of the things that Judge Galvin did before he retired was he ended the fees in the juvenile courts. So now in the juvenile sections, we are not collecting fees. So it's only at this point in the adult sections that I believe we're collecting fees, although fee collection is not a 100% rate of collection. So we definitely, I agree with Councilmember Wiltz, need to collect some more information and some more data on this.
Yeah, I wondered if there was like, and you know, I may be just grasping at straws here, but is there not like a sliding scale fee that could maybe like determine whether someone could even possibly manage this type of fee? You know, I've also had my fees waived from probation, so I do know that is something that exists. I don't know how that works in the upper like problem solving courts, but I have had my fees waived for probation, so I could complete successfully. I'm not sure if that gets put on a civil. I'm not sure.
I was just thinking about employers also having an employer that was supportive of taking time off to do that date reporting. We were working on our mapping project this afternoon, and that was something that came up, is just like, if people are able to, you know, take time off and they feel comfortable speaking with an employer, what are the incentives for the employer to be supportive of that person as they're moving along in their journey towards, you know, not recidivizing?
That's a great point. You know, as we go through these intercepts, something that comes up over and over again is supportive employment, regardless of the intercept. All right, I think we've got to the point where we've exhausted that conversation. John Hamilton, Mayor Hamilton, excuse me, see you have your hand raised.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to make 3 quick points. One, I think the fee discussion is really good and important, and appreciate that being brought up to look at not being, I don't know, penny wise and pound foolish, trying to generate some revenues that really don't facilitate the outcomes that we want to see. 2, I just want to note, thanks Centerstone, and we didn't hear a lot of talk in the in this focus on probation and after incarceration on work release, and mentioning we don't have a work release program. I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I do want to note that we've had extraordinary success with Centerstone on what's basically a public jobs program, where partnering with them to help provide public work on our streets and through the Parks Department and the Public Works Department. And it just made me think about the potential for, we have a lot of public needs, other public works projects that could be done in collaboration to help people build work history, work experience, that kind of thing. We found extremely successful and appreciate the partnership with Centerstone on that. And then the third point.
And Mayor, I'd like to just mention there, 100% of the people that we have served that were unhoused have been housed. Yeah. And it's a substantial number. Almost everyone is a person who is formerly incarcerated, but you know, the housing needs are huge. And again, through that supported employment, helping them not only with their work, we've also helped them with their housing. Just relevant to this conversation.
Yes, thank you. And it's been we've just been really pleased to help be the public side of that and in that partnership. And maybe something can be expanded and looked at more directly with the criminal justice system. And then third, I just, as the Fiscal Advisory Committee, I just wanted to note, and I appreciated the list of potential funding sources that were shared at the beginning of the meeting. I do think it would be helpful for us to have a sense of the scale of those, perhaps, if we can, to know the order of magnitude we're talking about. I mean, I have a sense of what the ED Lit brings in for the county, though I don't know what it's dedicated to. I know the amount of ARPA money that went to the county, to our county, to us, but I don't know exactly where we are on that. And then I do think there are also some other funding potentials, like there's the capacity to do a separate jail tax, I think, that could help support other funding needs to free up money for other things. But just, I believe having a sense of the scale of revenue and resources available in the context of the problem could help me anyway, and maybe us look at options going forward and make recommendations more informed. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for those 3 points, and Ms. Grove Paul for your inputs as well. Are there any other comments from or questions here? Seeing none or hearing none, I think we're going to open it up to public comment. If you have public comment, you're more than welcome to come up to any microphone at the table here. If you would prefer, you can use the podium behind Commissioner Githens, but I understand that could be a little awkward to stand behind a commissioner and talk. So please come up to the table. As you see on the screen, we'll give you 3 minutes here to make your public comment. And we'll start with anybody in the room here. Is there anybody in the room that wishes to make public comment on for JFAC this evening? Commissioner Githens, you'll be the first public commenter. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure I need even half of that. But the county commissioners have been listening to what people have been saying about treatment and the way it impacts intercepts 0 and 5, treatment for mental illness or mental health challenges, and substance use disorders. And so we are starting to talk about how we can make that happen. And we want to gather information, bring it to this group, of course, about what's possible. So one idea that we've been floating is to put out an RFQ or an RFP to ask what components could be incorporated into a treatment center. That would include crisis treatment, stabilization, outpatient, transitional housing, supported housing, the kinds of things that we've been hearing about today. What acreage would be needed, the size of the center itself, where this could happen, in an effort to make this a better community all around. This will also hopefully help with reducing recidivism, the kinds of things that we've been hearing about today, and be part of reentry. Funding is a challenge, we know that, but we've been talking to people both in Indiana and in other places about how they make that happen, either through public or through private insurance, and what we could do to help make that happen. You know, we've been talking about use of county property perhaps for a jail, and even if we go forward with that, perhaps we could carve off a section of that for a treatment center and have that be part of what the county would contribute to something like that going forward. So I just want to put that out there that we are talking about doing this RFQ or RFP so that we can look seriously at treatment options, and may even be fold into what Mary Morgan was talking about with the psychiatric evaluations and mandating treatment. So thank you.
Commissioner Githens, you did a fine job of taking up 3 minutes there.
I didn't take the whole 3 minutes. Come on.
You're doing just fine. Is there any other public comments, but either on Zoom or in the room here? Please come on forward. Have a seat. State your name so we know who you are, and you got 3 minutes.
I'm Ruth Eit, and I want to thank you for convening these meetings. I think they're so important, and I think especially hearing from people who have some of the perspectives that really show what it's like to navigate the system. I have some concerns that for many of us, when we see the slides and we see what's on the website, you know, obviously we have a lot to be proud of, but I also heard last week, I heard this week, I have heard in other settings, just how hard it is to navigate. And I think having people that you trust to work with, having some of the organizations we have in town, having the sustainable funding, and I really hope that going forward we'll continue to keep those things in mind and you know, step outside of some of the boxes we've been in and think creatively and think sustainably to, you know, we talk about evidence-based. There's some pretty strong evidence here for some really good things that are happening. So anyway, I think just thank you. I think addressing from the systems level, I think Beverly had mentioned some of that last time where we heard it's hard, you know, these gaps of weeks. What's gumming things up and how can we make the things that are working work even better? So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Can I make a public comment?
I wish you would.
I just, between the two comments, I'm wondering if there's space in what the commissioners are thinking about and looking for in an RFP or RFQ to stipulate community involvement or working with existing programs and agencies in the community. I think that a strong proposal for anything, any of this type of service would include using the resources we have in our community and maybe address some of what Ruth's concerns were too.
Yeah, we would also, though, have to be cognizant of HIPAA rules in terms of privacy and things like that that would go along with it, but certainly would want to have a collection of resources for people to utilize. And I guess hearing personal stories really makes a difference. I heard one recently about somebody with behavioral challenges that was put into housing, and the anxiety that this person had about getting the electricity turned on was just almost overwhelming. And, you know, I think about, I would never have had that be a challenge to call the utilities and to get those turned on. And so we don't understand the challenges that some individuals have as they try to move into housing. And so we do need those helping hands, the people that help make that happen.
Great, thank you so much. All right, please.
Just for Commissioner Gibbons, one of the things we heard last week, and it was from a staff person at New Leaf, New Life, was the reluctancy of people to return to a facility for treatment once they've left. And so I think, again, looking at the RFP and RFQ, knowing where that's going to be, not necessarily connected to the jail, but thinking about where that would be. I just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, I watched last week's meeting too, so but thanks for the reminder because that is important to keep in mind. Yeah. Hey, Peter, this
is Lynn. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'll sign up for my 3 minutes. All right, thank you. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. You know, I think one is, you know, in hearing about, you know, the difficulties that people have in getting into treatment. I think it's you know, oftentimes there's no question that sometimes people struggle, but, you know, we certainly have, you know, I pulled the data after I heard from last week, you know, kind of some of the difficulties people were talking about getting into treatment. And, you know, the last 2 months, I think 225 people coming in. It's an average of, 3.5, 4 days for people to come from the time that they call to get in for an appointment for an evaluation. Now, the other thing that I think is really important, so, we're able to get them in right away, but is also looking at stride. And I know, kind of stride and crisis, that is something that we'll talk about, at a later meeting. But that is important for every intercept, right? Intercept number 5, people who are coming out of jail, they don't know where to go. They're not sure what to do. They want to get into treatment right away. They are coming over to stride, and we're getting them in the same day. So we really do have a lot of resources that, weren't here when we were doing the interviews with Eve a couple of years ago, and people are really using it. A lot of the people that we're running into right now, Medicaid's been shut off for tons and tons of people. They have lost their Medicaid because of, the federal ruling around COVID. And just in terms of bills and anxieties, as far as being able to, get into your treatment provider or get into your doctor. So there's just a lot of care navigation things that go on. And there's tons of people who are, coming in and coming and getting connected to whatever resources they want. And our staff do an amazing job, I think, working with all of the resource providers in the community. So I think it's just another important piece that's there.
Linda, thank you so much for your comments. And would you tell us who you are? It's really hard to see who you are on the screens in here. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Linda Grove Paul. I'm the Vice President for Adult and Family Services at Centerstone.
Great.
And, the other thing is that we've been funded for Stride. And I guess that's the last thing I want to mention is, we have Stride as well as Mobile Crisis Now, which is 24/7, 365. And I know one recommendation, that was made is how do we do a better job in the community promoting it? And we need help with that. We are working with Cook and kind of their marketing team to try to get the word out more. But, if you're really going to divert people and they're not going to automatically call 911, people really need to know more about what is the alternative? How do I get connected? What are the resources available? What does that look like? So I really hope that, a recommendation that we can put forward pretty quickly is to get some support to get that word out there more. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Please.
I actually have a follow-up, Ms. Grove Paul. Can you hear me? Maybe?
I sure can.
Okay, good. Sorry. If you can't, let me know. So if I heard you right, and maybe I didn't, if, say I had a hearing tomorrow and I wanted someone to be able to get a mental health evaluation, did you say it would only take 3 to 4 days for them to be able to get into Centerstone to be able to get that evaluation? That's what your current average is?
That's correct.
Or is that just their first appointment to be able to make the appointment?
That's their first appointment to do the evaluation. Their first appointment is an evaluation.
To complete a mental health evaluation with a mental health provider?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a point person that the courts, sorry.
Can you hold on until the 6 p.m. bell ends?
Yeah, sorry.
There we go. Thank you.
Is there a point person that the courts or parties in the court could reach out to if we're trying to schedule a mental health evaluation based on that timeline? Who would be the point person?
Sure. Let me pull I'm going to give you Tracy Lickfeld's number.
And if you want to email it to I think JFAC, that might be more helpful, but I know that getting people into treatment quickly has always been something that we're hoping for, and knowing the right person to contact with the timeline that you're describing would be helpful. So if you might want to send me an email about it, I'd greatly appreciate it, and I'll share it with the office.
Okay, sounds good.
And then I actually had one more follow-up question for Ms. Gitt. Is that okay? Commissioner Githens, you were sharing that you're going to look at possibly learning more information about a facility focusing on mental health. Did I hear, is that right?
Right.
And I apologize, when we talk about mental health, I know that we're talking about a large area and different types of needs, right? There's someone who's coming in once a week, there's someone who might need inpatient, there's someone who might need court-ordered psychiatric medication and care. Are you anticipating this as a portion or connected to the jail? And is it going to have any portions that are locked or just
Right now, we're envisioning this as a separate facility because we understand that there is desire to have that separation. So we don't know enough about some of these things. We want to be talking to professionals in the field who have done this already. There is a group that's doing something similar up in Morgan County, for example, right now. And of course, we had talked with the Connections Company out in Arizona. And so this is why we need to start to gather the kind of information that would move us forward, because we're not the experts in that particular field. So, yeah.
Okay.
But we're talking an independent facility, basically.
Okay. Would that RFP or Q, would that also include reaching out to some of the justice partners, the public defender's office, prosecutor's office, with some of the challenges of mental health needs that we're experiencing and every day, so we could make some recommendations of things that would be helpful?
It's more, what would the facility look like? And apparently there are ways that folks can do estimates on some of the needs. And again, I'm not an expert. That's why we wanted to talk to folks who do sort of develop and build and operate these kinds of facilities. So it's listening to people with that experience. So I don't know yet what all it'll look like.
Okay, thanks.
And just as a reminder, our third to final installation of these meetings is going to be all about treatment, and we put that towards the end. So hopefully we could have a little bit more concrete things to discuss instead of theoretical, systems-based issues to discuss. So that's coming down the pike. Are there any other questions or public comment? I want to read off a comment left online by Dave Jones, who wrote, "I suggest that every JFAC meeting include a progress report on jail site selection, even when there is no progress to report." Dave, thank you for that comment. If there are no other public comments, then I want to, before I adjourn, remind everyone our next meeting will be Monday, July 31st, 2023 at 4:30 p.m. This is a makeup session where we'll be discussing Intercept Zero, which includes crisis efforts as well as diversion efforts. And that meeting will be chaired by the esteemed Councilmember Jen Crossley. So please make sure you get that on your calendars for July 31st at 4:30 p.m. We'll return in this room and on Zoom. Keep checking the JFAC website. It gets updated regularly for everything you need. And in the meantime, if you need anything, the JFAC email's on there. We do look at that very regularly, so please email. This meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.